Good afternoon and welcome to Referendum TV. Yes, we're here live again from the Hill Street Theatre in Edinburgh, at the heart of the Edinburgh Festival. We've got another packed show for you today. What future for the Scottish press after independence? We'll be getting the first results from the Radical Independence Campaign's mass canvass and looking at the future of Scotland's 100,000 Polish community in an independent Scotland. Before all that, we're going to have a look at the world as the newspapers have been seeing it. I'm joined here by Lesley Riddoch, who's been having a look at them for us. And first up, well, Alex Salmond, he's been using the spirit of Bruce to drum up yes voters according to the Scotsman. This refers to his new declaration of Arbroath, which was announced in a bowling green in Arbroath the other day. Now, Lesley, this is a new departure in a sense because the SNP and particularly Alex Salmond, they've avoided Bruce, Bannockburn and all this kind of history like the plague. Yeah. So why are they rolling it out at this late stage?
Well, I think we were talking about this before. I guess there's a feeling that actually it's been just a bit too much concentration on that currency, the pound, getting sucked back into that argument all the time, and perhaps not staking out the case in a wide of that, to the questions that actually bother most people in life, which is, would they get a move on democracy? Are we in a stagnant society forever? Are we going to improve our health? All these kind of things. And that can be encapsulated and housed well in something that has emotional resonance. But the only thing I was thinking about, the Declaration of Arbroath, if you look at it more than just the bit that most of us know about for as long as 100 of us still stay alive, the very beginning of it is actually significant because it was the first time that anybody in Europe had actually expressed a limit on the powers of monarchy. And the first bit of it is relevant, I think, for some of the issues. Well, some of the issues that people have with Alex Salmond sometimes, because it says here, yet if he, and this is referring to Bruce, should give up what he has begun and agree to make us or our kingdom subject to the King of England, we should exert ourselves at once to drive him out as our enemy and a subverter of his own rights and make some other man who is able to defend us king. I think the thing that's relevant about that's seen in historical terms as truly significant in the whole of Europe, because that was the first time that nations said, that guy is appointed by us, the nation, not by the divine right of kings. Now, I think that's interesting because actually that's what we're trying to say about, I think, this movement, which is it's now wider than one party, one leader, one set of circumstances. There's a whole bunch of people actually want to have a yes vote.
Of course, it wasn't about Alex Salmond or absolute monarchy or even constitutional monarchy. I mean, this declaration was about much more specific policies. It was about making a constitutional commitment to preserving welfare in Scotland and also defending the National Health Service. Now, are these really the kind of issues that should be locked into a constitution?
Well, personally, I think not. I also noticed that if they were going to be locked into a constitution, it might have been as well to announce them when the draft constitution was announced about 6 weeks ago. So this is the difficulties with starting to have the process that's been begun by the SNP. I think that should have been left, actually. There's no hurry. It should have been left for a genuinely people-based process, which is what the people of Iceland and various other people begun. So there's no gun at anybody's head on this. We don't need to rush as if actually something will be withdrawn from us. The ability to have a constitution will not disappear overnight. We should take our time to get this one right and decide what sort of issues should be in there.
Indeed. Well, there's still a gun at Scotland's head, at least as far as the pound is concerned. It dominates the front pages, as it's dominated the front pages really for most of the campaign. It's the single most prominent issue. And today the Herald is saying that Salmond has, well, he said that Scotland could keep the pound in the short term, at any rate. Well, this is one of the options, actually, was in the white paper anyway. I mean, people keep rediscovering this, the fact that the SNP, while they've said that currency union is the only option they really want to have, nevertheless, they did review the alternatives. They did review Plan B, didn't they?
Yes, and I mean, we had this yesterday, actually, when the papers were split between Alex Salmond saying he absolutely would not be discussing from here on in anything other than Plan A, because that's how you go into negotiations. You get your best cards, you say that's what you're going to stick to, and negotiations happen after that. But actually, half the papers, even then, were saying, talking about the need for the Plan B and that he would discuss it. Personally, I just think therein lies madness now. I think there was a poll, part of the YouGov poll that came out yesterday, found that 44% of people surveyed now thought the UK government, the Westminster parties, were bluffing. Only 40% thought they would stick to that line. Now, that's extraordinary from YouGov. So I think actually that's possibly enough on that.
Yeah, well, this morning we had on Good Morning Scotland, Alistair Darling again. I mean, it was a single issue. He went on and on about the currency. But it was interesting what he was saying, because he was rather anticipating, I think, this headline, because he was saying, well, a currency union wouldn't work. Scotland's economy would be destroyed by a currency union. But here's the thing, Plan B wouldn't work either, because it'd be Panamization and you'd be an international currency outcast. So basically they're saying, Scotland's stuffed whatever currency option it chooses.
Yes, and actually I thought it was interesting because that was absolutely every time Gary Robertson, whose contract has been renewed actually miraculously at BBC Scotland, so that was worth making a fuss about. So anyway, no matter how far Gary was pressing him about, is there anything else that matters to you, we kept coming back to this issue. And even in the body language terms, that these things are not nothing. I understand 60% of the way people understand folk comes across from their image, from their body language, these sorts of issues. His voice dropped, as if he was suddenly having to discuss parking tickets. The second it wasn't currency, when it was anything else, when it was what might we use taxes for, how might the health service work. Yeah. So I think these things are heard.
Deploying the finger as it is so effectively in the
And actually there's a variation of the finger developing, which is the truncated finger, which is, I've been told not to use it, but I just can't help it. So I think those things could be looked at.
Well, Scotland's not going to get the pound. Scotland's going to be thrown out of the EU as well. That's one of the other long-running scare stories. Another hoary old chestnut that's emerged today, which is Scotland's going to be, well, not thrown out of NATO, but will have to join the NATO queue. In other words, NATO's not going to take Scotland in, I mean, they may be gagging to get the non-nuclear Ukraine into NATO. Scotland may have all these NATO bases. We may have a strategic location and all this oil, but no, NATO would not have Scotland. What do you think?
Well, it is quite extraordinary, isn't it? And I mean, I haven't read that one in depth enough, but I find it very hard to think that NATO, which is about to have at its helm the former Social Democrat leader of the Norwegians, which is a small country of 5 million people with an absolute commitment to no nuclear weapons, could possibly have a difficulty with the Scots coming in just as they are at the moment, to kind of paraphrase Bridget Jones. I think just as we are is fine for the kind of basis that NATO will be rolling onto with his leadership.
But it's another blow for Alex Salmond, we know that. Anyway, Nemekite Pa. That's a different kind of approach from The Guardian's Polly Toynbee, who's written today appealing to Scots, particularly left-wing Scots, to stick with the Union because social democratic values are not dead.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I like the beginning of that article was quite heartfelt, although I think you picked up that there is that kind of opening line from folk who, I'm not trying to be critical, but do spend a lot of their time coming to Scotland to come to the Edinburgh Festival and potentially no other reasons. So it kind of comes up at this time of year that there's been a visit. And on the strength of the visit, emotional ties and heartstrings and so on are tugged.
Crossing the Tweed in the train.
Yes, and I mean, I'm not...
A night mail. Auden.
I'm not belittling that because, that's someone's real experience, and it's that gives you an authentic voice. And Polly Toynbee, I think, is a tremendous writer. She goes, though, through this argument that basically there is no way for Scots to kid themselves that we have a more democratic nation. And you'd have to start really trying to say, look at voting records. If it doesn't matter, then let's all go home.
Yeah, exactly that. Let me just quote what she said. She said that though tribally anti-Tory, there's no great sign that Scotland is more than a little to the left of Britain. Inequality is as wide, poverty is deep, and we take an enormous shift in income distribution to match Norway.
That's true. Poverty is as deep here, and we have got as difficult a problem with inequality. And, I think that is an issue that the Yes campaign has to really be out about. We're not trying to pretend that we're all squeaky clean here and that we have achieved nirvana, nor that trying to get to the Nordics in one bound will be easy. It's taken them 200 or 300 years to get where they are, with certain structural changes we've never been able to have, like, for example, having 100 years of proportional representation, like having had no feudalism, so no difficulties over land tenure, equal distribution of that to start off with. We can't hope to morph into those societies overnight. To me, the key thing is trust. This is what the successive Westminster governments have flared off. We now don't trust anyone. We don't trust journalists. We don't trust, bankers. We don't trust ministers. We don't trust MPs. And that is how a society begins to atomise and fall to pieces. Now, the evidence is that in the Scottish Government, at least, the last poll said there's twice as much belief that the Scottish Government is working in the long-term interests of the Scottish people. The Survation poll a month earlier put that at 3 times more. That's still nowhere near what the Nordics enjoy, but it's a platform to begin. And we've already begun. So I think, really, Polly, you know, it would be good to just kind of acknowledge some of those green shoots, which is what we want to see grow.
That's brilliant. But we can't leave the news without the biggest story of the day, which is, of course, your bike, which was stolen yesterday, not far from here. Has there been any sign of it yet?
No, but it's appearing everywhere on Twitter, and I'd just love to say to people, thank you so much for actually everybody tweeting it around saying we're finding Lesley's bike. I suspect that one's gone away of all flesh.
Okay. Well, we're going to stick with the papers. The Scottish press. It's become a bit of an issue at this Edinburgh Festival, actually. I mean, there's a whole series of debates taking place on it. And it's basically because a number of people are extremely anxious that the Scottish press, in fact, the printed press in general, is kind of on its uppers. I mean, the circulations are shrinking by about 100,000 a year for the newspaper market in Scotland. A number of people are getting increasingly worried about what future journalism we will have. The trouble is, of course, that it's moving. Everybody accepts that journalism is moving from the dead tree press, as it's called, onto the internet. But no one's got a kind of business model which can address that. Anyway, here's to discuss the future of the press. One of Scotland's most experienced and celebrated journalists, the award-winning deputy editor of the of the Scotsman and Scotland on Sunday, Kenny Farquharson. Big round, Kenny Farquharson. Hi. How are you doing?
Oh, we've got it here already.
Yes. Advertising.
Indeed. The dead tree press, does it have a future?
Absolutely. Well, newspapers have been in decline in the Western world since 1979. It's been a problem that's been coming for that long. And so we have to make a change, and we're making that change, and it's a struggle. And as you say correctly, Iain, it's a struggle to make it pay.
But the business model doesn't work on the internet. Because the newspapers, I'm as guilty as anybody else. I work for newspapers too, but they just destroyed their own market by putting everything on the internet for nothing and undermining the value of the product.
Different people are trying different models to try and make it work, subscriptions or to ring fence your content and make people pay for it, or to pay for it on a metered basis. There's lots of ways of doing it. No one's quite sure what's the right way. We're having some success with our website. We're the biggest website in Scotland. We've made that transition from newsprint to digital already to a large extent. Half of our readership is now online. We have 3.2 unique users a month and 16 million page impressions a month.
Everyone says you're a newspaper with no fixed abode because you've been elbowed out of your headquarters by Rockstar, the video games manufacturer.
Yeah,
is that true?
It is. It's we're moving to a smaller office, and
sign of the times.
It is a sign of the times, and and Rockstar are one of the great media successes of Scotland, and it's fantastic they do so well, and fair play to them to have an international global headquarters right in the heart of Edinburgh, next to the Parliament. I think it'll be fantastic for them.
What does independence mean for the Scottish press?
Well, who knows? I mean, I don't think you'd expect a newspaper to start making, commercial decisions or editorial decisions based on what might be a political outcome of that. You'd be the first person to slag us off if we were making commercial decisions on the basis of it.
And I say this as one of your columnists here, is it not strange that if there's around 40% or more of the Scottish public who favour a yes vote, that one paper, just for market reasons alone, has not horsed in on a daily basis? I mean, obviously the Sunday Herald has. Yeah. But why is somebody not just mopping up that market? That's what puzzles me.
I think some people misunderstand the Scottish press, and they think of it like the UK press, and in an ideal, it's split on an ideological basis. In UK you have the Tory Telegraph and the Liberal Guardian and the Labour supporting Mirror and what have you, and that makes sense over the UK. Scotland is and the quality press anyway has city fiefdoms as newspapers. So you have the P&J, you have the Courier, you have the Herald, you have the Scotsman, each of which dominate a city in its area, and people usually, very often, don't stray out with their city newspaper. So, when that's your area, rather than an ideology.
Well, there's an ideological split, isn't there? I mean, is it a split? Because nearly all the papers are unionist and opposed to independence, except for the Sunday Herald.
Yeah, that's true, and the Sunday Herald took a very brave decision and did it rather well.
Will Scotland Sunday emulate the Sunday Herald?
You're
going to come out and say where you stand?
It's my boss's decision. The Scotsman and Scotland Sunday will make that decision nearer the time.
But it's pretty clear from the kind of editorial, posture of the paper and the kind of stories. It's pretty clearly hostile to independence.
I don't think that's fair, Ian. Kind of think I've been looking at the referendum campaign for both newspapers, for 2 years now, and we've gone out of our way through things like this, which I'm glad you've got there, which is a supplement we've got all the way through this month, which is looking at independence of the issues and taking real pains to the point of, saying you can't get 50 words more than the other guy, of having equal treatment for yes and no. And then the bits of a newspaper that you can control in advance, the columnists, for example, Lesley's one of our eminent columnists. We have 4 out yes-supporting columnists in Scotsman and Scotland Sunday every 4 days of the week.
You know from your complaints emails that people have tremendous hostility to
they do,
Scotsman and Scotland.
But you know yourself as well.
Remember you had that photograph, didn't you, where the picture where the saltire was replaced with the swastika. That caused a huge row.
Yeah, it did, and it entered a big debate about flags and symbols, which I thought was fascinating, mirroring the similar debates in Northern Ireland about flags, and in America about flags, about burning flags, and that was it was an interesting moment.
As somebody from Northern Ireland, we're so not there.
That's
what I would take exception to.
Yeah.
We're not in a Northern Ireland situation, or having quite the same sort of emotion poured into some of the flag thing. But I guess the issue people would have, because I'm constantly pointing that out to people. Hello, I'm a Scotsman columnist. Nobody tells me what to write. Nobody changes headlines on me. Although arguments about headlines are time immemorial. It's the news values. I think it's the front page choices and the angles taken on stories. I think that give people the idea this is a.
Yeah, we had that one where if you remember, it was the Scotland Forward conference. It was Alex Salmon. On the front page, you had Alex Salmon. You cropped forward so it said "war" above Alex Salmon's head, and that caused huge annoyance.
Well, there's a distinction between the things like this I'm talking about, where you have complete control over the agenda and you make sure it's very finely balanced. But a news, both of you got experience of newsrooms, you know what this is, but I think people out with the business have a strange idea of what a newspaper does on a daily basis, that we sit around, kind of having endless discussions about, what should we do, and, how many days of pro yes or pro no things we had, and tweak that. There was Alyn Rusbridger during the Leveson inquiry, and the evidence he gave to the Leveson inquiry, I think he quoted a guy from the Washington Post, and I think it gave if you don't mind, I'll read it. It's just one paragraph, which I thought gave a beautiful insight into what newspapers are really like. And this was a guy called David Broder, who was a Washington Post commentator. And Rusbridger read this to the Leveson inquiry, and he said that a newspaper is a partial, hasty, incomplete, inevitably somewhat flawed and inaccurate rendering of some of the things we heard about in the past 24 hours, distorted despite our best efforts to eliminate gross bias by the very process of compression that makes it possible for you to read it in about an hour. And it's an industrial process to try and get as much of the news as we can get out on the front page.
An agenda. It's probably best if people come out with that, though, isn't it? Do you not think they should decide? Because otherwise people just get really fed up if it looks like. We've got editorial reports are very positively one direction.
Less of an agenda than Referendum TV, perhaps, and less of an agenda than the declared Sunday Herald has.
Well, absolutely. I think papers should have an editorial agenda, but I think they should be clear and upfront about what they are.
But the only thing I would say about that is, Kenny, it's right enough. It's chaos on wheels, actually, much of the time. But that's why, for example, all those years ago, that's why I did the Scotswoman, because it was trying to say that will just, trends will just continue. Things that you might wish to change will just keep happening unless you take stock a little bit and try to say we've got to actually try and shape this up differently.
Well,
I suppose that's the comment I would make, that if you were to look over the piece at headlines, they do seem to be coming over the piece from a certain direction, and that must be at a point you need to change gear a little bit if you want to keep it looking.
Is that not a misreading, though, of how this referendum's worked? Though, because I've seen the Glasgow University studies, for example, that look at news stories and say, well, that's a pro-yes story, that's a pro-no story, then aggregate them all and say, well, you're a pro-yes or pro-no newspaper.
It's kind of colour.
But when you look at that, it has to be, you are to an extent at the mercy of what people are saying that you have to report.
Well, look, thanks very much, Kenny, for coming to
Pleasure.
the Lion's Den of Referendum TV. So big thanks to...
And you've started all that. Well done.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
So let's have our next guest on. Well, he's a man of many parts, but he spends an awful lot of his time not even here in Scotland at all. He is the SNP MEP, Alyn Smith. Now, gosh, so many things to talk about. But, well, actually, first of all, what did you think of that NATO story today? Did you catch it that we were talking about in the newspaper? That,
I did. I'll confess I don't
tend
to read the Times for precisely that sort of story reason. But the thing that strikes me is that the headline font is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the story itself is getting more and more vacuous. What we've heard from the Secretary-General is precisely what we said in the White Paper. I spent a lot of time thinking about NATO and our relationship to NATO, and we had a very lively discussion about that within the SNP before we put that forward. And he said exactly what we've said many's a time, and there is no automatic right to get in, but the clue is in the question. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. we are pretty significant in that field.
Yeah, you'd think, wouldn't you?
So there's an agreed outcome between us and the UK, and there's an agreed outcome between us and the rest of the NATO members.
And it seems as well as if the EU problem, scaremonger problem, has kind of been parked now.
Well, to a point. And I think this is a deliberate tactic on the part of the no camp, where they're trying to drag the discussion into technical, he said, she said, you don't really know much about this, so we might as well just leave everything as it is stuff. Nobody serious has actually got into our stuff. I know myself, having been in Brussels for 10 years now, that anyone who's professional will look at this and say, well, that's really your business. I may have my own thoughts on the matter, which I'll tell you over a beer, but I'm certainly not going to tell you over anywhere else. And the UK government has been really, really pretty unseemly, going up and down the entire world, successfully, and in a few cases encouraging some pretty unseemly right-wing politicians to get into our business, always predicated with the weasel words that, well, this is a matter for the people of Scotland, and I wouldn't presume to tell them in it, except
we're enemies of freedom in the eyes of Tony Abbott, so I suppose all bets are off.
Well, he is the political equivalent of the Daily Mail, and that's saying something for an Australian, so if he was in favour of independence, I'd be worried. So
It is extraordinary, though, that actually all these luminous figures don't seem to have changed. I mean, looking through the polls, there was no wobble really after any of these pronouncements at all. Are we quite that sort of cussed a bunch of people that we really don't rate the great and the good in their pronouncements at all?
I think there's a bit of that, but I think it's also, here's somebody you've never heard of, but he's really, really important. They have all been men, incidentally. Have you noticed that one?
That's true.
But
is it?
Right.
Do we not have a Hillary Clinton moment?
You had a slight Hillary Clinton moment.
Well, she was asked repeatedly and repeatedly and
Yes,
repeatedly
and that does
repeatedly.
happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
But this is where none of them, with the exception of Prime Minister Rajoy in Spain, have actually voluntarily said something about Scotland. It's always been in response to questioning, which is then presented as an intervention, which I think's really pretty misleading.
That was pretty flat-footed about all this. They could have surely nailed it down before now. I mean, they didn't get authoritative voices in Europe coming out and saying, of course Scotland's going to be remain in the EU.
Well, it is a process, and our position always was that there was going to be negotiations. If there's going to be negotiations, you keep your powder dry for those discussions. So there is a process for us to go through. Bear in mind as well that that the EU is a confederal union based on member states, and it's not going to do much to encourage those member states to, as some would say, fragment. So there is an inbuilt.
You had Jose Manuel Barroso to knock you about the head for months.
Well, his comments were, I think, flatly contrary to his duty to the European Union, flatly contrary to his duty to promote democracy, flatly contrary to any degree of professionalism.
Comparable authorities saying that?
Nobody was willing to, and
that's a bit of an admission.
Well, it was also, that would have been us entering into the he said, she said stuff, which we put forward our case. Nobody has actually objected to the case. Now, what has happened, and I've caught a number of UK people out on this, where they've presented the SNP view as being something totally different to what it was. So we have put out our case in the White Paper, the parallel document to the White Paper about EU stuff. Nobody who has read that document has found anything to find a fault with in it.
Can I take you off to just more generally in Europe? Because I mean, you're trotting off to Brussels a lot of the time. Yep. You're mixing with people who have got quite different experiences actually of constitutional struggles sometimes quite violent ones. What's the kind of feeling that you get then from your compatriots in the European Parliament?
Well, I was saying this on the Lesley Riddoch podcast. Indeed, a very fine podcast it is as well. By my reckoning, it's round about 60-65% of my MEP colleagues have not just lived through a democratisation process, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Greek, Portuguese, Spanish juntas. They have often led it. So what makes us different is that we are so utterly democratic, so utterly energisingly positive about this is a discussion about, in our multilateral world, where should decisions be made, how do we reboot Scottish democracy. That's a really energising, inclusive discussion without so much as a bloody nose. That makes us unusual. That's where they don't quite get what we're doing. And that's where a number of the comments that we've seen, Polly Toynbee indeed today, just much of the comments that we've seen coming from outside of Scotland are predicated on a lack of understanding of what's actually going on here.
Mm. Just thinking about the international dimension again, I mean, there's not a wild enthusiasm, is there, from Eastern European or Central European countries for Scottish independence, despite the fact that most of them became independent relatively recently, over the last 20 years when they came out of the Soviet Union. Why do you think they're so leery about it? Why do you think they're so reluctant to say, well, yeah, Scotland should be independent if it wants to be?
Because people are professional. And I joined the Foreign Affairs Committee just after the European election just gone, so I've spent a lot of time recently getting to know the folks on there. And people deal with the world as it is. And that's not to say that anyone's going to do us any favours, but they will respect our rights. And our proposition is based utterly upon democracy, human rights, the rule of law.
I mean, you're pretty good in this, we can all see. I mean, why do not hear more from you? Why is this campaign all about Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon and nobody else? Are you been told not to speak anywhere?
No, not at all.
Well, why do we not hear from anyone?
Well, I'll tell you no lies. I have been so busy on a 7-day schedule, leafleting and canvassing and knocking doors in Edinburgh South, my home constituency, to the extent the constituency I live in, and it's just been fantastic stuff. And it really is. This campaign is going to be one on the doorstep in a series of conversations.
The media campaign, I know grassroots is tremendously important. We understand how that's going, but isn't it important how it's seen, at the media level? And there, it's exclusively about Alex Salmond.
Well, feel free to tell our media team that. I think the boss is doing a great job.
That's exactly what we'll do. One other question I just wanted to raise with you, because I know you're very strong on opposing homophobia, you're very strong on equality and gay rights. What do you think about Peter Tatchell's intervention into the referendum campaign?
It's been pretty useful, and much like a number of people from CND, and we saw Bruce Kent came out with a very, very helpful comment, having understood what it is we're actually trying to achieve with this stuff. It's not about the flags and anthems, it's about building a new sort of society and including and enshrining LGBT and equality rights within the Scottish Constitution.
Were you surprised that Peter Tatchell did come out?
I mean,
not come out in that sense, come out in support of the referendum.
He came out again in respect to that. He'd said some fairly positive stuff before, and as I say, anyone who's paying attention to what we're actually trying to achieve with this stuff gets it.
Yeah, because unlike Polly Toynbee, I mean, a lot of figures on the left, south of the border, are now beginning to think more positively about it, because in the past their instincts was very hostile to nationalism. They see what small nationalist parties are like in the rest of Europe. Often they're very hostile to immigration. They're very right wing.
Yep. We are a very unusual phenomenon in a European context. I have this discussion on a regular basis in Brussels that the word nationalism does evoke a response, not always positive.
Yeah.
But in Scotland, I've got to say, I don't think nationalist is actually the best word to describe what it is we're trying to do.
Really?
I don't think my country's better or worse than anybody else's. But I think
what word would you prefer to use?
It would need to be something like independentist or
independentist?
something. Well, it works for the Spanish speakers. But I look forward to, post a yes vote, we all get to stop being nationalists and we get to go back to talking about the lives of the people of Scotland. I want to see independence happen in order to give us the tools and the best shot to reboot Scottish democracy, actually put down on paper what's that country want to be and actually start getting it right.
And have you got any thought, just finally, on the kind of Nordic comparisons that now seem to be, I mean, they've been made, but there seems to be every day. There's one actually on the back of the Scotsman's piece here that's kind of questioning whether it's at all possible for Scotland to ever think that it could emulate the Nordic nations.
Well, I've always put that stuff as we can learn from their mistakes and we can learn from their successes. And we're not going to be a new Norway no more than we're going to be a little Britain. We're going to be Scotland, but better. And the decisions of a future Scottish government, I believe, will be of any political stripe better to suit the needs and wants and ambitions of Scotland than we're ever going to get from being a minority in Westminster. Now, I think the Nordic countries have got an awful lot of good stuff to teach us, as you said yourself there, in terms of land tenure, in terms of how we actually reboot our social security systems, how we get people off the scrap heap and into work. That's a subject really close to my heart. But there's things that we don't want to emulate in terms of what they've done as well. But we've got 5 countries worth of experience within the Nordic Council that we can pick and choose a la carte what's going to suit us best. I'm a great believer in bringing the ideas back into Scottish politics, as you've been doing with Nordic Horizons, and actually chewing the fat about what's going to work and what won't work. But it's about learning from their experience, not trying to emulate them.
Yeah. Okay, amen to that, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excellent stuff, Alyn. You hang on to the couch because we're going to continue this discussion now. It's not just Eastern European countries who are slightly uneasy about Scottish independence. There's also nearly 100,000 people living in Scotland of Polish origin. Some of them are very worried about what will happen after an independent Scotland, and what would happen if Scotland is removed from the European Union. Now, one of the prominent figure in the Polish community in Edinburgh is Tomek Barkowy. He's the proprietor, the director of the Hill Street Theatre. I've mispronounced his name, as I'm doing with just about everybody today, but put your hands together for Tomek Barkowy.
Welcome. I've been called by Americans Tom McBork as well, because I'm in Scotland, so it doesn't matter. My name is Barkowy. But I was listening to your discussion about the nationalism, and that's what a lot of Polish people are afraid of, because the Polish nationalism is the extremely right wing, and is introvert, and that's why those people who left Poland, they escaped from this, and they don't understand the Scottish nationalism, if we can talk about this. They are open. They are not introvert. They are looking outwards, and that's why nearly 100,000 Poles are living in this country.
So they must be pretty confused in Scotland right now, because it's the SNP which is calling for the borders to be removed, and it's UK politicians are saying there'd have to be a border erected to keep out immigrants. We Poles were living enclosed for so many years that borders are not threat to us. What is bothering Polish people is, first of all, do they have a right to vote, and not only a political right but moral right, and that's what I have a very nice young man who is working for me in Newtown Theatre, and he, although he lives here, he just said, but do I have a moral right to vote? And I said to him, look, if you planning to stay in this country, if you're planning to make your life in this country, it's not your right. That's what you have to do. Well, I was surprised when you told me that it's getting on for 100,000 Poles.
67,000. I believe the 67.
It's a very significant constituency.
Yes, 67,000 is registered for vote. So, but I believe that 100,000.
How are they going to vote? How do they break down at the moment?
At the moment we don't know. Every time I speak to a Polish person who doesn't know, it's going to the yes, because look, if there are a number of issues which Poles as well hearing, and not hearing only from media here, but from Polish media, because they are listening and watching Polish television here, and the problem is, okay, what's happened if Scotland, independent Scotland, is not going to be EU. And I said, and
there wouldn't be free movement of labour. So
but Fiona Hislop said a couple of days in a meeting with Poles, just said, we guarantee you that whatever happened, that you are going to have a place in this country. So EU or not EU, those 100,000 people will have a space here, and that's the most important for them. However, if the vote will go no, and in 2017 we have a referendum against participation in EU. So all of them, they have to go home. And that's the tragedy for them.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are obviously, it's very difficult for them because they see all the headlines about Scotland being blocked from remaining in or re-entering the European Union. I mean, and many people think that is a scare story, and that it's inconceivable that Scotland would actually be thrown out. Nevertheless, they must be seeing this in the papers day after day, that Scotland would go to the end of the queue, and therefore they must be anxious about whether they vote yes or no.
Yes, they are, but I strongly believe that because Poles are very funny people. We always vote against. So we will vote against status quo. Absolutely. Right, okay. And I strongly believe that we are going to push this. Out of 60,000, I believe that probably 20,000-30,000 will vote, and I hope that 99% will vote.
Alyn,
yes.
are you conscious of the Polish community? I mean, do you deal with them very much? You speak to them a lot? Or?
Very much so. Yeah. It was close to my heart. I did my masters in Warsaw.
Well,
so a million years ago, I was a new Pole in that sense.
What was your masters in? It's a matter of interest.
Advanced European Studies.
Right.
So it's the College of Europe, Warsaw campus. The course was taught in French, German, and English. So my Polish goes as far as Dwa duże piwa, proszę, and that 2 big beers, please, and that sort of stuff, which served me pretty well, it has to be said. But so the fact that we've now got so many Poles, Central Europeans, Eastern Europeans coming in, making Scotland their home is really close to my heart. Within my own team, I've got Ania Lewandowska from the clan Lewandowska, proudly Polish, proudly Scottish, more of a mad nat than any of us.
Yeah, that's surprising. The SNP has always had quite a lot of Poles active in it, haven't it?
Well, people who come to Scotland for a reason. And they often come with an awful lot less of the ideological baggage than we've got from years of ingrained stuff about what the SNP is and what the Constitution is and that sort of thing. And I think we've got a very, very fertile ground with new Scots of all sorts. And the main thing there is to get across to them that, well, we are absolutely from the bottom of our heart. If you live in Scotland, you're Scottish, full stop, no more discussion. How Scottish you feel, that's your business. But as a politician, I think it's just so important that we do say, if you're here, you're in.
But what do you want then, Tomek? I mean, you said in your estimation 60 to 70,000 Poles, and you only estimated about 30 of them might be voting yes. What do you think you need now to make any?
First of all, we've got a internet site which informs Poles in Polish as well about possibilities and how to vote is Polls for yes side. And I believe that there's a lot of meetings which, for example, Paweł Wiczyński, who started Polls for Yes campaign, I think he's every day he's meeting people, and a lot of them, and persuading them to go and vote. And we need a little bit more persuasion from you guys, from politicians, from top politicians as well, and maybe Alex Salmond should say something to Poles openly. Just we need you guys, so just vote for us.
Well, he did actually do a broadcast with one line in Polish. Yes, I noticed after you mentioned this some time ago. You want more than that? It's
maybe not more, but more frequent. Yeah. And that would be. On Friday, I'm going to share the platform with Alyn and Nicola Sturgeon as well, a very important person, and is going to be Polish issue will be.
This question of the currency has a different resonance among Polish people, doesn't it? Because they've faced the option of joining the single currency in Europe. They don't like the idea of the currency union, and they want to keep the zloty.
I don't know if they don't like it. They cannot afford at the moment yet, and I believe sooner or later, I'm very pro-Europe, and I believe that Europe should be a union of nations, not only states.
Maybe Scotland could join the zloty zone.
Why not? The zloty is quite strong at the moment.
It's not bad, I know. Actually, it's not. Could do a lot worse than pegging to the zloty. Anyway, look, we're going to give you a chance to speak right at the end here, to speak in your own language to the Polish community.
Okay.
So there you go.
Okay. Drodzy Państwo, to jest trudna decyzja, którą podejmiecie. To jest decyzja, która może zaważyć nie tylko na waszym życiu, ale na życiu całego narodu szkockiego. Ja naprawdę myślę, że my, Polacy w Szkocji, musimy doprowadzić do tego, żeby Szkoci uzyskali niepodległość. Głosujcie za niepodległością i głosujcie za własną przyszłością i przyszłością własnych dzieci.
There you are. You heard it here first. Okay, thanks very much to Tomek and Alyn.
So now we have another guest who's coming hot foot from elsewhere, not as far away as Poland actually, but from Glasgow, I think. Would you please welcome the editor of Bella Caledonia, Mike Small. Hi, Mike. Hi there. So, am I right in thinking, have you come from the launch of in Glasgow of the Radical Independence Mass Canvass results thingy?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So we're on the edge of our seats then. Tell us more.
Well, it's 16,000 people have been canvassed, and RIC are going to put all the results up on their site and on Bella Caledonia, so you can pour through it some detail.
It's not the RAC, it's the Radical Independence.
That's right, yeah.
RIC.
I don't think the RAC are involved
Probably
at this
not.
stage. So it just tells a very different story on the ground, on the doorstep, from what the polls are telling us. And we've known this for a long time, but we're just getting a bit more detail on it. So it could be regional, it could be varied, whether you're in Dundee, Glasgow, Inverness. They've been doing this throughout the country, and tells a very different story. And that is roughly that there's a 60-40 yes victory in those communities where they've been canvassed. A completely different story. And that's because they're talking to low-income voters, low-income communities, the disenfranchised who have given up on mainstream politics a long time ago and are now enthused by sovereignty in the air.
That's an amazingly different story, as you say, from the small experience I've had of going out and canvassing in different areas. You certainly don't get a feeling of that.
Yeah.
One of the things, though, that's raised by people is whether or not people will register to vote, point one, because lots of people have been off voting actually since the poll tax.
Yeah.
And are said to be, as it were, hiding sometimes from debt.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of worry that actually the second you register, the state recognises you, and lots of things you've been able to dodge perhaps suddenly come home to roost.
That's right, and part of the Mass Canvass campaign is not just to say how are you voting, but here's a registration form, let's get people registered. That's a key part of it, and they've been doing that by their thousands. So when the polls sample, they sample either the same people again and again or the same sort of people again and again, and this is a much more live update from the street.
The other thing would be that, you go through that process, perhaps you do actually register, but then, the 18th of September comes, you're in a community that's maybe not as tuned in as everybody else to, the politics of what's going on, and actually you don't turn out. Is there any strategy then for on the day movements to try and kind of get a bit of a vibe going in some of the communities?
I think these communities are hugely motivated. I think there's going to be a massive turnout, and going around seeing people engaging in politics for the first time in decades and extremely excited about the concept of reclaiming power. That's what it's about.
And I mean, because the naysayers inevitably will be sort of quickly onto this, what about the way that results have been achieved, the kind of accuracy of the canvassing and so on?
Yeah, well, that's all transparent and it will be up there in some detail. And people say that there's a confirmation bias idea that if I turn up with a yes badge, people say yes and just try and get rid of you. There might be an element of that. I'm sure the methodology will be analysed, and there might be that. It's just a very different picture that's being presented.
And so how then are we getting, because people keep saying this, I mean, I don't know if there's anybody in the room who's actually been phoned by an opinion poll company. There's one, I think, we're seeing. Two, both of you. Right.
Well, we live together.
You live together. We're going to count you as one happy couple then. Yes. Well, then we've got one. But I mean, how is it then that the official polling companies, if you like, and this polling can be so very different? How is it that they have never... how is it that the official polling companies are not ever seeming to get the so-called missing million?
Well, because they don't engage with these communities. They're off the radar and not being engaged with, so they're not being phoned up. They're either not registered to vote already, which is the point you made, and that is important. So they're just flying below radar. And I don't think the pollsters really pick up on this.
I don't know. Do the pollsters simply go through the electoral register? I thought they actually just had a much more random, searching for names type.
Well, they try to weight their samples, don't they, for things like that.
That's what you kind of imagine.
So because they know that there's differential turnout, and that
Yeah.
very often in these kind of areas people will not actually vote on the day, so they
Yeah.
try to build that into their methodology.
Yeah, I don't know. I can only speak to what we're seeing from the RIC returns, which are quite a different picture.
And so, you're editor of Bella Caledonia, fabulous online magazine. We were talking earlier about Kenny Farquharson about Scotland on Sunday and the difficulties of the print press and so on.
The dead tree press.
Yes, you love that phrase, don't you?
Yes.
Did you coin it?
No, I picked it up from somebody, from a newspaper, I think.
But how do you feel then? I mean, what's Bella's strategy in all of this? Because you've actually been doing dead press yourself, in the sense that you've had Closer that you've published, which is a marvellous publication.
Well, I think that there is the danger that all media outlets speak to their own tribe, their own constituency. The Telegraph speaks to their own constituency. Bella's got a higher circulation than the Telegraph or the Times in Scotland today. So
That's not huge, though, is it?
it's not huge, but I don't get a regular slot on BBC Radio Scotland to analyse the press, which is an extraordinary circular argument for the media. It's the unionist media analysing the unionist media. So I'm not Angus MacLeod, but I've got higher circulation. So what we've been doing in this time is building.
Yes, you can applaud.
is building. What we've been doing is building resilience into the new media, and that's through crowdsourced funding that lots of campaigns and groups have been doing. And I think there's over £500,000 have been raised by various groups in the last 6 months.
So is that going to keep you going beyond the referendum?
Well, we existed well before the referendum. We campaigned for the referendum, and we'll exist for a long time after it, whatever the result. And because it's about transforming Scotland.
So what's the kind of mission statement then of Bella Caledonia?
It's about self-determination, autonomy and independence. And what does that actually mean? It's about getting above ourselves. What does that actually mean? So that we might make that victory on September the 18th. I think we will. But we might have quite a big challenge to go after that.
Yeah, but just as a news outlet, I mean, you don't try to emulate newspapers. You don't have big staff.
No, we don't
you
have
don't
the
do
resources to do
investigative
that.
journalism. You can't really do that, can you? So is this going to be an alternative to the press, the printed press, which as everybody says, is on its way out?
Yeah. So I saw an amazing model the other day in the Scotland Yet film that is going on online tonight, and they were talking about energy in Scotland and how decentralised renewable energy was around rural Scotland feeding into the centre rather than the opposite of a central hub feeding out. And that's the model. So we talk about the fifth estate, where you have turned on, wired people who are active citizens, who are logged on, they know what media they're using, they're creating media themselves, and that's a completely different model. So we want to be at the heart of that, but facilitating people through that change, rather than saying we're replacing the old centralised authorities.
I wonder if there are happily a kind of plethora of different platforms within the Yes side of things, and if you like the progressive side of things. Is there a point, or is this just a kind of slightly sort of anal desire to have everything tidied up, that you would come together into one publication so that you would have everything running from news, like Newsnet Scotland do, right through to opinion?
Yeah, well, there's talk of that, and there's ideas in the framework to think about how that might emerge. I'm not going to tell you about that.
Oh, come on. He does. No one else will get.
But, I think there's lots of potential there. There's money, there's resilience, there's expertise, and people have learnt a lot in the last 6 months. So
Tell us about your day job.
Well, this is my day job because
because you raised enough. To do this full
we
time,
raised
6
enough
months.
money to be full time, and I know a lot of other people have. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Kenny talking about moving out of his building. It's kind of fading star replaced by rock star, really, isn't it? And if you look at Pacific Quay, it's the same with the BBC. Pacific Quay, which is an empty building. When it was built for a certain 1,000 amount of people in there. Yeah. I had a friend there was a fire run, and they all went outside. And she said, there must be more people in.
There's still a few.
I'm afraid there's not. I know, but it's the same model. It's these huge buildings that are now empty because their media model has failed, and trust has broken down between the journalist, the broadcaster, and the people.
Yeah, so tell us then, the press conference that you come from today, there's going to be one every day, is there, from now on?
Yeah.
And what's the platform that should be found on?
So the hashtag is All Yes. It's all the campaign groups from the Alternative Yes side. So that's Women for Indie, Asians for Indie, Labour for Indie, all those groups coming together once a day from 11 to 12 at the CCA in Sauchiehall Street to say, here's our story, this is what we're talking about. and we're inviting journalists to come and report on that. That's the real campaign.
Did you get many folk today, or from the rest of us, if you like, the dead press?
Yes, I'll be very nice about the dead press. No, we did, and we've got lots of report, and we're working with Indie Live so we can rebroadcast.
Is it going to be a yes? In a word?
Absolutely.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Paul. Okay, now, how is the referendum like a fruit machine? Well, according to the Fringe show Referendum and Dumber, yes or no is like plums and pears. Well, I don't get it either, but here's Gilchrist Muir, Matt Urey and Stanley Patterson to give us a demonstration.
Would you like us to perform straight away?
Yes.
Yes,
please do.
fantastic.
Lycra, whoa.
Music maestro.
Plum Party, welcome to Mastermind. Name?
Plum Party.
Campaign focus?
Fear. No, money. Money.
Plum Party, you have 2 minutes to answer questions on your campaign policy, and your time starts now. After a banana's victory, the Bananaland currency would be...
Worthless.
Is being in Europe desirable?
Oh, it is if it helps us to win, and then it's totally not.
Where do you stand on immigrants?
Normally in the street. That's where they seem to live.
Are there any foreign people you like?
No.
How much oil is left in the North Sea?
Oh, not at all. There never was any. What oil?
Aren't you investing billions of pounds opening new North Sea oil fields?
Just to prove conclusively that there isn't any there.
Didn't you lose the taxpayer £1 billion from the privatisation of Royal Mail?
Oh, this taxpayer fellow may have lost $1 billion, but I know a chap who gained $1 billion from the same deal, so it swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
Upgrading your nuclear weapons will cost the taxpayer a further £130 billion. Why spend so much on bombs?
Well, we need lots of shiny new bombs to replace all of the expensive old bombs that we didn't need. When the Armageddon comes, we need to blow up at least as much as everyone else. Otherwise, we won't be taken seriously.
And where is a safe place to keep these super expensive nuclear bombs?
Somewhere remote and otherwise expendable.
Like next to the largest city in Bananaland?
Precisely.
Can you give us 3 campaign policies?
Empty ones?
If you like.
All right, then. The number 1 promise is that we can definitely promise more promises. And that is a promise. Number two, if you don't vote for Plum, we'll make life hell for you in any way we can. And number 3, a vote for Plum means that things probably won't get much worse for a while. Oh, except for all the extra austerity cuts, of course, which...
Which you've started, so you'll finish?
Precisely.
Thank you, Tomek. Thank you.
Very good.
Just tell us where you. How can they see the rest of the show? It's Dumb and
Referendum and Dumber is on at the Newtown Theatre on George Street, and that's at 6:15 every day until Sunday, the 24th. And it is fantastic. It's the most fun you'll have all fringe.
in the referendum, and it's totally unbiased, isn't it? It's yes and no.
It includes both. We've had yes and no voters come and enjoy it, leave with a smile on their face.
Do they all get put in a bag?
They don't get put in a bag, no. Oh. But we've had very lively discussions with all our audience members afterwards, and it's great fun.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
MacWhirter and Stanley Patterson.
Right, so we have Sarah coming on with any of the tweets that have been rumbling away, despite the fact that we have once again forgotten to mention what the hashtag is, hashtag RefTV. But
We're still
clearly
dead
people
tree
are
press.
quite sort of good at picking up that idea themselves.
Okay.
So come on in, my dear.
Hello.
What's been doing?
Hey, Sarah.
That's nice. That's nice. Basically, everyone loves Alyn Smith. They think he's the best thing since sliced bread. Or is that actually Alyn Smith cheering himself there? Well, quite right too. Well, Indie Matters says, close your eyes and Alyn Smith MEP sounds like Thoughtland. Apparently you sound just like Pat Kane, which is nice. I don't know if that's an accolade.
I'd say, but yeah.
Never see us in the same place at the same time.
Curiouser and curiouser. And really liking Ellen's comments about that we don't want to be like Norway or Little Britain, but we want to be like Scotland, but better. And very likeable man. Most US citizens, even with leave to remain in the UK, would not have a vote. Their status in an independent Scotland possibly needs clarification, says Jerry Mulvena. So maybe we need to look at US citizens in Scotland. So that's an interesting one. Lots of love from Janie Nichol for you, Lesley. Apparently you are the voice of reason, discussing Polly Toynbee's sentimental viewpoint on the Indie Ref in today's Guardian.
Oh, well.
And urging everyone to tune in. So Janie Nichol is an artist. She's loving your work there. And lots of love for Referendum TV today. Apparently Otters for Yes, or Indie Otters, as you gave a shout out to the other day, still loving you, Lesley. And liking the fact that we're saying sovereignty in the air is a great line. Maybe we should use that instead of our bemoaning the media and becoming the media line. Sovereignty in the air is our new line.
Great. Well, let's urge people to keep tweeting away, because I mean we disappear off these chairs in kind of a couple of minutes, but we don't sort of stop. We don't turn off the feed in our brains, do we? We're always thinking about it. So if you've got thoughts as well, actually, for anybody that you'd like to have on as a guest, I'm saying this and then thinking, gosh, am I really saying this? Yes, I am. You can always
take over
get
television
in touch with us, which many people have done. In fact, that's how we had one of our fabulous guests on before, who was talking about childcare. So you can get us really hashtag RefTV or at Referendum TV. Yes, these are two ways to reach us. So all it remains to do really is thank everybody for today's programme.
Indeed, that's about it. Tomorrow you have Patrick Harvey, who is the co-convener of the Scottish Green Party and MSP for Glasgow. Duncan Hottesall, I think I've pronounced his name incorrectly, Labour activist and blogger. And I also have Stuart Kirkpatrick, who's the head of digital at Yes Scotland, and also devised the original Scotsman website, and he really is very much on top of the internet. But
sadly here on Friday, actually, I understand. A busy, busy man.
Okay.
But tomorrow there will be lots on.
There will be lots on. So join. Are you on tomorrow?
I am.
Okay. And Sarah. So join Sarah and Lesley tomorrow. From me, from everyone here. Goodbye from Referendum TV.